Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Bloody Scotland Book Club. I'm Tariq Ashkanani, writer and host of the writing podcast Page One. It's November time, Christmas is on the horizon, which means this is our last book club meeting of the year. But luckily, they've saved the best books and the best guests for last. So, for everyone watching, please send in your questions and your comments on the Facebook chat as we go, and we'll get to them. But first up, let's meet our guests. We have Zoe Venditozzi. If I said your surname correctly, Zoe?
You have said it correctly.
Oh, I nailed it first time. Look at that. I know.
You're already my favourite host.
She's a writer. Her novel's called Anywhere's Better Than Here. And she's also the co-host of the podcast Witches of Scotland, which is a deep dive into the history, law, and stories of those accused of witchcraft. And in fact, she's the co-host in that podcast with our next guest, who is Claire Mitchell. Claire Mitchell KC, to use your full title, of course, who, along with Zoe, you also campaign for posthumous justice for women posthumously convicted. That's bad notes I've written on there. Convicted and executed for witchcraft. You're also an advocate, hence the KC, of course, and you are a legal expert, I believe, in the series Murder Island, which involved Ian Rankin. That's very exciting.
Yeah, that was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, sounds like it. And our final guest tonight is Dan Simpson, who's the host of the award-winning podcast Writer's Routine, where he chats to authors about where, when, and how they work. And in one of his most recent episodes, he chatted with Carnegie Medal-winning writer Melvin Burgess. Burgess, yeah.
Burgess, yeah, Melvin Burgess. He did.
I'm nailing the
Junk.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Fantastic. That's going to be my first episode to listen to when I check that one out, because that's a fantastic guest. But next up are books. We've got 3 fantastic books this month that I think really do show how varied the crime genre can be. Our first novel that we have up is Still Water by Rebecca Pert. And each author is going to come in and read a little bit of their book. So we'll start off with Rebecca reading from her book, Still Water.
I would like to do a reading from page 240 of the book, so quite near the end. And just for context, this is Jane, the main character, working in the fish processing factory, which she works at. Jane grips each salmon, shoves it beneath the blade, feeling the shock as the flesh splits, sliding the headless fish across to her right. The roar and rumble of the factory assaults her, scrapes against her skin, the violence of the place, the machines cutting and cracking and slicing. Her exhausted body feels sick with it, but she grits her teeth, keeps going. She imagines the pipes leading down into the flooded quarry, sucking out all that rank, stagnant water, spurting it onto the fields nearby. The water that has preserved her mother for all these years, pickling her like a fetal pig in a specimen jar. She thinks of her belly, the water in there, the pale translucent thing forming. Spots swarm her vision. She feels like she's going to throw up. She steps back, braces her hands on her knees, lowers her head, breathes. "Are you okay?" shouts Anthony next to her. Jane straightens up, nods. She looks at the fish in front of her. She grabs a salmon, heads it, passes it on. Grabs the salmon, heads it, passes it on. Looks at their faces, mouths open as if appalled, wrenched gasping from the ocean, the clean salt sea, the moving tidal water. She sees a bathtub, its clear glassy surface. She shakes her head. Stop it, stay calm, breathe, focus, stop thinking of water. She grabs the salmon, pushes it towards the guillotine. Only it isn't a salmon. It is her mother's plastic arm. Jane stares, feeling ice cold all over with horror. She sucks in air and screams. The arm pops out of Jane's slippery hands, slides off the belt onto the floor. There is a yell. Someone hits the emergency stop button. The conveyor belt halts suddenly. There's an intake of breath, a flurry, people shouting, saying, "It's Jane! Jane, what happened? Are you okay?" Jane is breathing hard, her body ringing with terror, staring at the plastic arm on the floor. She blinks. It's not an arm. It's a salmon, just a salmon, a regular salmon, same as the hundreds of others. Someone is yelling something about an ambulance. An ambulance. So there was an arm. What, thinks Jane. Wait. Oh my God, says someone. First aid kit. Call 999 now. Anthony has his hand clamped to his mouth, his face pale. And then Jane notices the blood on her shoes, dripping, splattering onto the ground. Quite a lot of blood. She feels woozy. She raises her hand, the hand that was holding the arm. Her first 2 fingers are missing. In their place are bloody stumps.
What a fantastic piece to read from, I think, there. That was Still Water by Rebecca Pert, and is about a woman named Jane, as we heard there, who has to confront her past when the body of her long missing mother is found. It's set largely in Shetland, and it's really is a literary, incredibly atmospheric first novel, and I thought it was fantastic. But I'm going to pass over to Dan to lead us off in this one. What was your thoughts, Dan?
I think she picked the perfect passage to kick us off with, didn't she?
Yeah.
All the books that we're talking about today are very much themed around providence, about trying to change where you've come from. Is it different from where you'll end up? And that was really key. It ran the whole way through Still Water. It kicks off. We're in Cornwall at a big gorge, really, at this big well, a huge mass of water. And we get the quite eerie sight of this hand, this plastic hand that we just heard about her mother's, bubbling through to the surface. And I thought it was a fantastic way to start the story because it was quite short, but quite precise and fantastically literate with the way she wrote everything. And for a book that was barely 300 pages long, I thought Rebecca had managed to fit in so much because the way it was written, the way it was structured was, I'll say that word again, so precise.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first of the 3 books that I read. And I think it maybe suffered from that at the time when I read it, because I was, oh, this is good. And we'll see how the other 2 get on. But it is probably the one that has stayed with me the most. I thought it was a fantastic way to explain trauma that we maybe don't think about. And the payoff as we move towards the end, I thought it was unraveled in a really, in just a very intelligent and quite a beautiful way that I didn't expect. And as you said, Tariq, the atmosphere of Shetland, I've never been. I can only imagine, but from reading the book, you feel like you are there. You can feel the chill around you. You can hear the rushing of the waves. You can see its absence of quite a lot, apart from the people who are there, who maintain themselves there, whose family have lived there, and who don't really like visitors. I thought that was a beautiful way to, and a very poignant way to tell that side of the story.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's you can definitely tell that she's obviously been to Shetland and done her research. I think when the place in a book is almost in a character in its own right, I think, and it really comes through, I think. Zoe, what was your thoughts on the book?
I think sort of similarly, it stayed with me of the books. I really enjoyed it, and it's not an obvious crime book, I don't think. And for me, that's a really good thing. I enjoyed the exploration of sort of the mother-daughter relationship and of the grandmother, who ends up being the grandmother-mother-daughter relationship initially. I really liked that. I thought it was interesting that she decided to set it in the 2 locations as well, and then being so far apart was really interesting. So there was lots of different themes in it that I definitely engaged with. And I enjoyed the island setting as well. I thought that was really interesting, but it sort of goes against the stereotype. The people were quite welcoming and, friendly. Initially, she was worried about it, but it certainly wasn't now. Like in the contemporary setting, that people shun her for being different. They seem to have welcomed her back. And although she's quite an odd character, Jane, she's quite difficult. People seem to be quite, accepting of her. So I like that as well. And I like the sort of the description of the father. I thought it was really good because it could have veered into quite melodramatic areas, but it didn't. It was still quite kind of mannered and quite sort of calm, the way that it was described, which I enjoyed. So I love the device of the hand, just the idea of just coming out the water.
Some of the images that get thrown up from that book are just fantastic, aren't they?
Really
Claire,
enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a fantastic book. Claire, what was your thoughts? Oh, I think you're muted, Claire. Sorry.
I have to be told at least once so we can get out. So, I mean, Shetland as a separate character was something, but water as a separate character and a separate presence literally flowing through the story was something else. And Dan, you said that she chose one of the really good bits of the book to read. In fact, by the time you get to that point where you're reading it and you know what she's going through, because that particular paragraph's really quite close to the end of the book, and you know what she's dealing with and you know why she's not thinking of water. It really is. It really made me quite queasy actually to do that with a book, which is good going for a crime book, because usually you got a strong stomach for these things. You're reading about murder, those sorts of things. But the smell of the fish factory, her discussion about gutting the fish, I thought it was an incredibly clever book. But by that, I don't mean, when people sometimes say, oh, a book's really clever, like it's obviously clever, like it's enjoying its own cleverness. Mm-hmm. It's just when you go back to the end and read it, you see how beautifully the themes have been, what is really a very simple story, but the themes that have been put through it. And I particularly really like the theme of water. I am scared of dark water, and that was perhaps something that was perhaps why I really, really enjoyed it, and it really spoke to me, the images that she spoke about with water and the dangers of water.
Yeah.
Tariq, can I follow up on just a couple of the points that you brought up, Zoe? This was really about the plotting of it, because she grows up in Cornwall and then she is so bored with where she lives. There's nothing going on in this town. So she gets up and moves to Shetland, which I thought was a beautiful contrast in her ambition being completely pulled away from under her feet. And you mentioned the dad. So when her mum meets the dad, it could have... I rolled my eyes just a tad because I thought this was going in a different direction to how it ends up. And it would have been very easy for Rebecca, I think, to write the older man almost grooming this younger girl in a completely different way. And
I mean, he is an older man though, like isn't he? He is, and he's sort of in town, and she is quite sort of green. She's
hugely.
She's, like you're saying, she's looking for adventure. So I agree with you. It could have gone in a much more like kind of gross way, but it didn't.
And it could have been a lot. Oh, sorry, it could have been a lot more on the nose, couldn't it? I think the manner of that grooming and the diary aspect of it. I don't know what you found about this. Sorry, you three. But when I first started reading the diary part, because I'm a bit cynical, I rolled my eyes a bit and I thought, oh, this is just quite an easy way of kind of explaining this part of the story. But upon reflection, when I had finished, I really wouldn't have liked to see that in any other way, because the way the characters play off each other and the way that Rebecca unravels this character through a teenage voice, I thought was a really fantastic contrast.
That was one aspect of the book that actually I didn't love that much. I like you, quite cynical. So when I see diary entries, I always think, oh, that's an easy way of getting all the backstory in, and access to conversations nobody else would have. But I didn't mind it. I thought it was fine. But what I didn't really like about it was that she's very young, like she's chronologically very young. She's not a worldly person at all, the girl, when she starts writing in the diary. But the way she writes in the diary is a much older woman for me. I thought it was much more sophisticated than I would have. I mean, she writes about kind of young things as well. And it's maybe because I work with adolescents, but I just thought it just wasn't entirely convincing to me. But it was beautifully written, and I enjoyed it, and I liked the way that it did shed light on different things. But there were points where I was thinking, like, really, she's that age and she's landed in that place on her own, and she's got this tiny baby, and it was just, some of it was quite sophisticated language, particularly about the medication that she was on. I thought it was quite a modern look at the way that was, considering when it was actually set. But I still enjoyed it. It's not a massive beef. I still thought it was really good.
You can tell as writers, you're looking like more critically at it, whereas I'm just nosy and I'm like, great, a diary. What's it going to say? It just, I perhaps because I don't think of literary devices in that way because I've never been called upon to use any of them, that I can just relax more. But I kind of enjoyed it. What did happen to me though was I actually forgot it was a diary at some points. Like it sort of brought you screaming back into it with maybe a little jarring point, and you're like, oh yeah, this is a diary. So I did sometimes forget that what I was supposed to be reading was something that had been written 2 decades before by a young person.
What I liked about the diary, and I totally agree with you, that I think often it is a very kind of easy way just to get backstory in without having to do any kind of tell don't show type thing, or tell don't show. It is doing tell not showing. But what I liked about it was that it the kind of mirrored plot lines that kind of built up really nicely into the end point, and you kind of, you learn about the mother's death without ever feeling like it was being artificially withheld from you. Like it was well done in that respect. And I wanted to ask everyone a question about what it makes you think of as a crime book, because as I think was it clear that mentioned, it's not a typical crime, it's not your typical crime book. Or as Zoe mentioned, sorry, it starts off with the body being found, and at first I was like, okay, this is this is a crime book, and then it very quickly, a lot of other books that would have been the focus of it and would have been much more about the investigation and the kind of the police and the procedural aspect perhaps, but this one it went more into the character stuff, and I thought Jane was such a good character that I didn't mind pulling the focus away from the body and onto her kind of backstory. But I kind of wonder what your guys' thoughts are on that, and also how do you define a crime book? Do you see this as a crime book, or is this more of a literary story?
I'm pretty loose with my definition of what a crime book is. I just think there needs to be some crime in it. That's literally all I'm looking for. But I know some people would be really hardcore about it, and they'd be like, it needs to be following somebody detecting what's happened with the crime, and there needs to be like particular steps to go down. I think sometimes that kind of crime book, I know that that's a really obvious description of a crime book of the genre, but they can be a bit A, B, C, D, right? I know what's going here, and that's fine, because there's times where that's absolutely what you're looking for. But I think with this one, I know it is based on the crime, kind of, but it's not, the focus isn't about the crime. So I could understand that some people might read it and go, well, that's not a crime book.
Yeah,
but if
totally.
you've got as loose a definition of me, it is.
I agree with you. Yeah. Claire, about yourself?
I absolutely would agree. It's definitely a crime book. I mean, we start with the crime, and I felt kind of, we were the detectives trying to find out from the diary entries where it was going, and by the time you get to a point in the book where you're going to find out about her mother, the mother's death, and everything that happened with that, albeit that it's happened, the way that you move towards it, you're the person doing the detective work in it, you're reading the diaries, you're working out. So I think it was just a detective novel from a different angle.
It's a good point. I like that a lot. Yeah, that's true. What yourself, Dan?
I don't know. I think I'm a bit like Zoe. I'm not sure if the genre label. I know we're here, for Bloody Scotland, talking about crime books to a whole load of massive crime fans, and we are those as well. I don't know if to label it in the crime genre would really work. I mean, there's a body. It starts with a body, and we find out why the body's there at the end. That's not really the mystery. I don't. That wasn't what kept me gripped at all. What kept me gripped was reading about this person's life, finding out why she's gone up to Shetland, finding out really what's happening with her mum and this older man. And it was just an exploration of the character that kept me hooked. I had very little interest in what happened to the mum, if I'm honest with you. So in that aspect, I wouldn't place it as a crime novel.
Yeah, I resist the definitions really of novels into genres. It annoys me a bit. And I think it's really limiting, because then people go, well, I'm only going to read this type of book. And I'm an English teacher as well as a writer, so I want people to just read widely and just kind of see where things take them. So when we've talked in the past about what books to do, I've suggested before another book, No Country for Old Men, and people thought, well, that's not really a crime book. And that is totally a crime book, but it's not a standard one because it's a literary book. But there's no reason why something can't be kind of crimey and also literary. I think it could be I think it's really nice about crime that it's a broad church, that it's all sorts of different things. I think it's good for us to range about with our reading. So I like the fact that it's it's kind of crimey, but it's not like, come on, let's go down the steps and see where the clues are there. You know, I like that. Yeah.
It's almost something that the publishers like to have their genres so they know how to sell it and market it. But I think for readers, it's never as cut and dry as
it pisses
that.
me off. Like, especially as a woman writer, you are much more shoehorned into particular genres as a woman. I'm saying a woman writer. I'm a writer and I am also a woman, but I'm not a woman writer. But I would absolutely, I'm marketed that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And it irritates me because I think it's nice, the chanciness of reading, that you can just go into a book and go, that's not what I'd normally read. And then it opens up like a whole new avenue of
Totally.
So I'm really glad that this was included in this episode, because it is pushing, I think, what we would generally agree is the crime genre novel.
Perfect. I agree with all that. Right. Shall we move on to our next book then? Next up, we have Dark Pines by the fantastic Will Dean. He's always written quite a few books now. This is his first book and the first in the Tuva Moodysson series, who is a deaf reporter in Sweden investigating a brutal murder in a remote forest and how it might connect to an old unsolved killing. And we'll pass everyone over to Will to do a little reading for us as well.
An elk emerges from the overgrown pines, and it is monstrous. 1/2 ton, maybe more. I stamp the brake, my truck juddering as the winter tires bite into gravel, and then I nudge my ponytail and switch on my hearing aids. I get the manufacturer's jingle, and then I can hear. The elk's 30 meters away from me, and he's just standing there, grey and shaggy and big as hell. My engine's idling. I think of Dad's accident 12 years ago, about his car, what was left of it, and then I punch the horn with my fist. Noise floods my head, but it's not the real sound, not like you'd hear. I get a noise amplified by the plastic curls behind my ears. The horn does its job, and the bull elk trots away down the track with his balls hanging low between his skinny grey legs. I speed up a little and follow him, and my heart's beating too hard and too fast. The elk walks into a patch of dappled sun up ahead and then stops. He's prehistoric, a giant, completely wild, ancient and taller than my rented pickup. I brake and thump the horn again, but he doesn't look scared. I'm panting now, sweat beading on my brow. Not enough air in the truck. There are no police here, no headlights behind me and none in front. The fur that coats his antlers glows in the sun, and then he swings his heavy head around to face me. His posture changes. Utgard forest darkens all around me, and he stamps his hoof down and breaks a thin veneer of ice covering a pothole. My headlights pick out. A splash of dirty water hitting his fur, and then he looks straight at me, and he drops his head, and he charges. I brake and pull the gear stick to reverse and slam the thick rubber sole of my boot down on the accelerator. My scream sounds alien. The truck pushes backwards and opens up a clear space between me and the bull elk. Between my face and his face, between my threaded eyebrows and his rock-hard antlers. I lift my phone out of my pocket and place it on my lap, even though everybody knows there's no reception in Utgard Forest. My eyes flit between the windscreen and the rear view mirror. I'm trying to look in front and behind at the same time, and there's a flash of movement in the trees, something grey, a person maybe, but then it's gone. This is all my fault. I should never have driven after this elk. I see dull sky through his antlers, and somewhere inside I reach out for Dad. I hit potholes and fallen branches, and those black eyes are still there in my headlights. 30 kilometers an hour in reverse gear. My phone falls off my lap and rattles around in the footwell. I reverse faster. The light levels are dropping and the elk's still coming straight at me. My left tire gets caught by the edge of a ditch and I have to turn hard to jump out of it. And then his antlers touch my bumper. Metallic scratches piercing my ears, and I can't see a damn thing. I feel a stick of lip balm digging into my thigh, and then my mirrors flash, and it's someone else's headlights. Behind me in the distance, there's a truck or a tractor, something driving straight at me. It should be welcome, but it's not. This track's only wide enough for one of us. The antlers scrape my bonnet again and I wince at the screech. My mouth's dry and I'm hot in my sweater. I'm reversing into a crash with an elk in my face. And that's when I hear the gunshot.
Oh man, another incredibly tense scene there, expertly read by Will. Well, let's kick things off with Zoe. Why don't you let us know what your thoughts were on Dark Pines?
First of all, just a note on where he's reading from. I think he lives in a cabin in Sweden, and the books are set in Sweden. So I presume that's in a Swedish cabin. And I'm just watching that the whole time, thinking a massive spider's going to climb out of that pile.
I was thinking, whatever that man might be scared of, spiders are not.
Also, that Swedish cabin, he built it himself with his own 2 hands.
No way.
Ridiculous.
Yes, it's not. I mean, it just puts every man to shame. I feel just. I can't be up to a pair of shelves. Never mind build a house.
Was I the only one more amazed by the hair than anything else? He's got the best hair coverage of top and bottom that I've ever seen.
This is a stylish fellow, I think.
But you've also got to wonder if the amazing dog is like the third thing on the list. You notice,
yeah,
the other 2. I mean, you know.
I love that as a setup.
Shot. Yeah,
I'm absolutely there for that as a setup. And I really love the Swedish setting. I really love it. Like many people, I love like crime dramas that are Swedish and Danish and Norwegian and Icelandic in translation, obviously, and also on the TV with the subtitles. Really enjoy it. So I read the first Tove Moodysen book, I think during lockdown. I've read, I think, 3 of them. I think there's maybe 4 now. I don't know if that's
the 4th one just come out, I think.
Yes, I think I've read the first 3 and I really enjoyed them. I love her as a character. So she's moved back from London to live in Sweden. She is Swedish, but she's moved back in this book to look after her mother who's ailing. And she is a journalist, so it's a different central character. So rather than a detective, she's kind of an outsider, so she breaks the rules with trying to find things often, and she does her own thing, and she's quite scrappy and chippy, and she's deaf, as he mentioned. So that brings another sort of frisson of danger sometimes, because if she's out in the elements, her hearing aids can get wet, so she has to take them sort of off and on in different settings. And of course, it's snowy at points in the book, so that brings something extra to it. And just as we were saying before about water being a really important part of the book, this book, what's really important is the pines, it's the forest. So the forest is enormous, like bigger, I think, than we can really conceive of. And there's a murderer on the loose, as is often the case, and there has been a person found and their eyes have been removed. And there's an echo back to an unsolved case from years before where there's a bunch of people that were killed and their eyes were removed. So Tuva's kind of stumbled into this story and doesn't know anything about it. And the forest to her is, without giving too much away, due to something to do with the forest, she lost her dad. So she has to kind of confront that. So there's this big kind of scary sort of feature of the forest kind of looming over her psychologically. And then the murders occur in the forest, and there are these kind of weirdos that live on the fringes of the forest that she has to interview and kind of work out if any of them are involved in the murders as murderers or as knowing what's going on in different ways. So I really enjoyed that. I love the setting of the little town where there's basically a McDonald's and her friend who's got a food truck who makes Thai food that's not really Thai food, because the Swedes just want really bland versions of what they think is Thai food. And then I think that there's a supermarket, cafe and a hotel, and that's basically it. And so it's really good, this idea of this young woman that's moved from London to this kind of like nothing happening strange place where the viewer's being odd because I think she's bisexual and she's deaf and she's not from there and she's a bit nosy because she's a journalist. So I love the setup of it, and I really enjoyed the stories. They're much more talking about the genre. They're much more what we'd think, I think, of as traditional crime
totally.
novels.
Yeah.
So she's investigating, she's looking behind, what's going on. But I really enjoyed it, and I loved her as a character, and she's really sparky, and I really enjoyed them. Looking forward to reading the 4th one, probably over Christmas.
Nice. Yeah, I thought I agree with you. I think she is a fantastic character, and the kind of the fact that she's deaf, he doesn't play it as a weakness. It's almost, in some ways, it's almost a strength. She can lip read people and stuff, and it's a really interesting angle that he takes and a really refreshing take. What was your thoughts, Claire?
this for me is the kind of perfect winter read when you're sitting somewhere warm, but you're dealing with someone who's out there in the elements in the middle of nowhere, dealing with quite a lot of unusual people in a forest, it has to be said. There are some great characters that she's written about, some really unusual people, and what I really like about it is, Zoe, you've talked about the fact that she's deaf, and it adds to that sense of perhaps an extra layer of tension in the book. But what I also felt was that there was a real layer of normality going through the book as well. You know, her mum being ill, talking to her pal about how she felt about coming back to be with her mum, her pal experiencing racism at the hands of the Swedish, and Tuva being a bit sort of unaware of that or surprised about it. So there's a really, really nice backstory, which it really did actually make me want to buy more of the books. So one is on my reading list for Christmas, and I think that's the best compliment that I can pay, that I want to read more about this character and find out whether or not she stays and why. And I actually found the book really, really moving at the end of the book, which I was slightly surprised about, because again, it is quite an ordinary, fitting within the ordinary spectrum of the genre, and you don't find yourself very moved as I was at the end of it. So
nice. I would agree with all of that as well. It is a fantastic book. It is. There's definitely moving stuff in there. Yeah, it's. I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but it's fantastic. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't think it touched me as much as it might have done for the rest of you, just for a few reasons. But I really liked Tuva as a character. There are many sparky journalist kind of characters in crime, but I thought the way Will told her story was very much show, don't tell. We were speaking about that earlier. I think you mentioned that fact she was bisexual. It's not really mentioned. I don't think she actually says the words. It's just kind of covered in the way she gives someone a shrug or gives someone an eyebrow nod when they ask the questions. I thought
she does think about a girl that she knew in London before she goes to bed.
Yeah. So, but it's never that explicitly told. I don't know. Maybe she does. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
They were just best friends, though.
But it could have been a lot. It could have been a lot more. Like we were speaking about the early book, that could have been a lot more on the nose, and I thought we'll drip fed that. I think the fact that Tuva is deaf was handled fantastically, and it gave her qualities for this crime that maybe wouldn't have someone who could hear fully. It wouldn't have come across as well, and that was mirrored in the Dark Pines, how oppressive the forest is. She's got that quite a lot. I really enjoyed that, and it was a fantastic device simply for making the inner monologue a bit stronger, which you wouldn't have seen. There are just a couple of things that I didn't really enjoy. I thought some of the conversational language didn't really strike with me. I just wonder if anyone ever speaks like that. I think sometimes in crime novels, conversation is how you think it should sound, how it sounds in other crime novels, when it doesn't really ever sound like that. So I had a little issue with that, and the fact that half of the book or more is Tuva traveling down this one road to go and interview another person and another person and another person in this very small hamlet with a lot of odd bods in the middle of the forest. And I didn't really like that as a plot device. I thought Will did handle it and deal with the repetition of that as well as I think anyone could have done.
When I was reading it, it reminded me a lot of, for obvious reasons, Stieg, or at least what I remember when I read Stieg Larsson's Dragon Tattoo books. And it's, as you said, so it's that kind of like Nordic noir kind of stuff, but not just the setting. I think also his style of writing is very kind of clean prose, very neat sentences. And as you were saying there, Dan, you get an insight into Tuva's thoughts without becoming like super bogged down into personal introspection, and it's a really nice way of, it's kind of conversationally almost, but sometimes it feels like she's almost talking to you, the reader, without breaking that fourth wall. And I thought I really did love the feel of it all. And I wanted to ask you guys what you think about this kind of write what you know stuff, which is kind of on everyone's minds at the moment. And it's obviously, Will's written this deaf character, and he's obviously done a lot of research into the topic. And he makes reference to, I think in the acknowledgements, he talks about, folk that he'd obviously ran the ideas past or the wording past and had got in, kind of research from them. And I think in the current climate right now, you get a lot of stuff that puts authors off writing about certain subjects for fear of pushback. And I wondered what you guys think about, should the write what you know be taken more literally, or is there always room for writing about someone or something that you're not? And how would you go about that?
Tariq, that's such an interesting question. Like, I really like that, because people are thinking about that now. Can you write as a white writer? Could I write about a person of color's experience? Or I think that's the one that's most obvious to me. And I suppose it depends where you're setting your books as well. It just depends, I suppose, where you are. I'd really, like, I've taught creative writing in the past, and I would always really caution against the idea you can only write about what you know. I think that's actually really boring. But at the same time, if you're going to write about things that are not your absolute lived experience, because I'm not only going to write about, a woman of my age living in a village on the northeast of Scotland, like, how boring would that be? I mean,
not at all. I would read it.
I mean, I do a lot of stuff that's about women of my age in villages in Scotland, but that, that's just by the way. But
I have no idea what she goes up to, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, Claire. But you have to do, your due diligence, don't you? And I think you can see that Will in this case has, as you say, is in the acknowledgements that he's taken advice. Like, I would be really concerned if a writer just went, well, I'm just going to imagine what it's like to be deaf, and you might get it right, but you're probably not going to get it all right. And it'd be things where, like, a deaf reader, a hearing impaired reader might read it and go, geez Christ, that's so irritating, that's not accurate. So I'm hopeful that because he's got that in the acknowledgements, that he's actually had from somebody with that life experience, this is what that's like. So I think we should be free to write more broadly than just our absolute own lives. But I think you have to really do your research and be open to the fact that you might have some ideas that you hold that are complete nonsense, and you have to listen to somebody with that when you're writing it.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't agree more, really. I think you summed it up well, Zoe, there with just the words due diligence. I think it would be terribly remiss and ignorant to assume that writers can only write about very specifically what they know. I mean, we can't all be Stephen King cracking out a book about an English teacher in Maine every year, which is fantastic and it's brilliant and it sells well. But I just don't think that would suit everyone. And as long as you are doing that due diligence, as long as you are speaking to the people who are more who you're writing about, for want of a better phrase, I can't quite grasp it. I think it's fine. The beauty of books, reading and writing, is that words on a page can take you anywhere. I think to say that you can only write what you know would just be a very iffy avenue to go down, and would lead us to I mean, if you think back, we wouldn't have some of the fantastic books that we have if Tolkien hadn't imagined hobbits running around the Shire, for instance.
Yeah, totally.
But I think also at the same time we've got a duty not to try and kind of like take other people's stories. Like there's certain topics there is in no way I would ever sort of breach into and be like, right, I'm going to write.
No, of course.
Life in the I don't know, the Amazon, like, from the viewpoint of a person that's from the Amazon, like that's too much for me. That's too much, Philippe. But like somebody like Barbara Kingsolver writing about the experience of a scientist who goes there, and that's all research, that that's different. I can sort of throw that, but I think there's a wee bit where you've got to watch, especially somebody that's me, that's from my background, that's white, that's middle class. Like there's things that I would be careful about sort of barging into. But I think with this kind of thing, what Will's done, I think, is really, you can see that he's spoken to somebody and he's got good ideas from them.
Yeah. Claire, what's your thoughts?
I think one of the things that if people are writing from their own experience, it just adds that level of authenticity to any writing that you can totally relax and enjoy. If the person is writing it is coming from a perspective that is their perspective, then it gives you that sort of confidence in the writing, and that's an easier thing. So as a reader, I suppose is it better to read from a position of someone who knows about what they're talking about because it's their lived experience? Yes, but how many boring books would that make if people didn't apply their creative imagination to things as well? So I take the view that it can give the reader more a more authentic experience, but sometimes that's not what's necessary, and that's sometimes also not exactly what the reader's coming for. So it doesn't make so much of a difference.
Yeah, I suppose it's almost that kind of trap you go down when you do research in a subject and you think, right now I'm going to put this entire Wikipedia article in the book because I've read it, so you're going to read it now. Yeah. And then you think actually 95% of that no one needs to know. So it's about knowing what do you bring in, like the stuff that Will brought in on the batteries need changed and you couldn't get wet and all that little stuff that I never would have thought about. Was that felt like a real nugget that really was important and played into it. And we've got a comment in the comments from Lynn McCune who says she loves the character and the book's very atmospheric, and she says that she's deaf and he gets all the details spot on without overwhelming the crime story. So that kind of is exactly what you're saying there, Claire. Fantastic, cool. Well, let's move on to our final book of the night then, His Bloody Project by Graeme Macrae Burnet, and it's set in a crofting village in the 1860s Scottish Highlands, where young Roderick Macrae is being held in a prison following a horrible triple murder. And here's Graeme to give an incredibly atmospheric reading from his book.
I'm writing this at the behest of my advocate, Mr. Andrew Sinclair, who since my incarceration here in Inverness has treated me with a degree of civility I in no way deserve. My life has been short and of little consequence, and I have no wish to absolve myself of responsibility for the deeds I have lately committed. It is thus, for no other reason than to repay my advocate's kindness towards me, that I commit these words to paper. Mr. Sinclair has instructed me to set out with as much clarity as possible the circumstances surrounding the murder of Lachlan Mackenzie and the others, and this I will do to the best of my ability, apologising in advance for the poverty of my vocabulary and rudeness of style. I shall begin by saying that I carried out these acts with the sole purpose of delivering my father from the tribulations he has lately suffered. The cause of these tribulations was our neighbour, Lachlan Mackenzie, and it was for the betterment of my family's lot that I have removed him from this world. I should further state that since my own entry into the world, I have been nothing but a blight to my father, and my departure from his household can only be a blessing to him. My name is Roderick John Macrae. I was born in 1852 and have lived all my days in the village of Kildue in Rossshire. My father, John Macrae, is a crofter of good standing in the parish, who does not deserve to be tarnished with the ignominy of the actions for which I alone am responsible. My mother, Una, was born in 1832 in the township of Toskeg, some 2 miles south of Kildue. She died in the birthing of my brother Ian in 1868, and it is this event which, in my mind, marks the beginning of our troubles.
Wow, that was, I mean,
amazing.
3 fantastic readings. But that one was just next level, I think. Right, so we're going to pass over to Claire to kick us off in this one. What was your thoughts on this book, Claire?
Yeah, well, just to start, there were no spiders in that, but it was equally as spooky as no spiders. I loved this book. I've read it before, so this was me coming back to reading it again, and I think I even enjoyed it better the second time around. I'm not quite sure why that was, because I already knew everything that was going on. Excuse my own dogs in the background there. As you've already heard, this is a story about a triple homicide, and we know at the start of the book, relatively early on, that there is trouble with the Mackenzies, and his father has some form of trouble with the Mackenzies, and he takes the writer back, and he's kind of writing a diary of sorts at the behest of his advocate. So again, the diary is kind of is used as a premise, but he takes it back right to when he's a younger boy, just a couple of years earlier, I think 18 months earlier, when his mum dies, and the effect of that on him, the effect of that on his family. What I particularly found so distressing, and the word is distressing, about the book, was the rigid class status that people were held in at the time, which didn't allow them to make complaints like they should have been able to about things that went wrong, or there was nowhere for them to go to complain. And especially as someone who is a lawyer who deals with people's complaints all the time, I actually even found it quite distressing, the story of what he went through, which makes the then murder, the circumstances of it, all the more jarring. And it's an incredibly jarring point in the book. And then we go on from that to work out whether or not he had a defence to that. And as somebody who has been a criminal defence lawyer for like almost 30 years now, that was an absolute pleasure to read, and talk about the amount of work that he must have done, not only to recreate Applecross in the 19th century, or that peninsula, or that area, but also to talk about our formation of defences to criminal charges. I don't want to give too much away, and how he argued them in the book, so you could understand the various perspectives that could be looked at. I thought it was amazing, but absolutely huge amount of work must have gone into it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book, and you're totally right. The research I think he's done on this topic is just insane. And then to write it in a way that's not just like an info dump, it's actually just a narrative, and it's interesting to read, and it pulls you through it is fascinating. Dan, what yourself?
I loved every part of this, and I can't echo enough what you were saying there, Claire, about the work that must have gone into it. The narrative voice the whole way through. I felt so sorry for Roddy, because I mentioned earlier on, these books were really themed about providence, the idea of fate, the idea that you can't escape almost your station in life. And we start off right at the start knowing about these 3 murders that he's going to commit at only 17 years old. And you just felt so sorry for him. But the way that Graeme writes that part of the story, it's just one narrative, it's one long chapter. I was on my Kindle, and it was it's going to take you 4 hours to read this chapter, which is a little bit intimidating, but you were sucked right in. And then I think that the 3 different styles of the book were so fantastic, because the beginning is, as I mentioned, this very long chapter, which is Roddy's explanation, his diary, as you mentioned, Claire, of why he's done this. Then we get a little bit of witness statements, and then the end is the trial. And it's 250 pages long, so it's snappy. It gets through it. It's tight. It's written fantastically in a brilliantly in a way that's sort of literary fiction. But what I really wanted to say, and it's tough because you don't want to give anything away, but I think only a book this good and a writer as good as Graeme clearly is, and the work that's gone into it, could get away with the ending that it has. I don't know if you kind of feel the same. Again, we can't really say a lot, but it's just it's a presentation of the facts of the case, as the author is just a passive onlooker. This is what happened. Read and enjoy. And I thought that was a really interesting way of telling what is a traditional crime story. Man murders 3 people, and it just, the way that was presented, I thought was fantastic. And also the point at which the murder happens. I think with any other book, I might be a bit critical, because it just kind of happens. I know it's led up through 100, 150 pages, but it's just Roddy kind of picks up his Crover one day and goes for a walk. And it's, oh, okay, that's happened now. And I think in any other crime book, I might have been a bit critical about that. But the way it was quite subtly led up, and even though you knew it was happening, you had kind of forgotten about it. And then the surprise was brilliantly sprung upon me, I think, if any of that was clear.
It's an interesting...
That was a joy dump, not an info dump.
It's an interesting one because it's almost like most crime books. It's about who is the murderer. This one, I think it's the opening line or so. The first page, anyway, you know exactly who it is has done it, who the victims are, and it's the joy is finding out what's led to this point, and then what happens after that. You know, so it's very unusual, and I thought it was simply fantastic book. Zoe, I don't know what your thoughts on it were.
I was really intrigued with the idea of the unreliable narrator, you know, and the idea that Graeme sort of as the author of there's a person that's put together the historical documents is kind of like, oh, there's been some discussion that maybe he didn't write it and this person might have been a witness to it, and you know, who's really telling the truth here. And I like the idea of using these full historical documents. I mean, like, because of the work that Claire and I do with the Witches campaign, we often talk to experts about original documents and about people's confessions. So that's really intriguing to me, the idea of really what a confession's telling us. Is it telling us the truth, or is it telling us the truth that the investigator or the questioner or the cleric or whoever it is pushing for the interrogation? Is it telling what they want to be the truth, and how much of it is sort of fed through whatever the sort of the social setting is of the time of the confession? So I found that really interesting as quite a clever area to go and kind of examine and root around in, and like, what is the truth, and how do we know who's telling the truth? And you know, that whole idea that my dad used to say to me is there's 3 versions of the story, yours and mine and the truth. And you know, I think that that's really fascinating as well, you know. And Claire, you must get that with your work, you know, who's telling the truth, and how much truth does the court get, and how much truth do lawyers want from it, and you know, how much truth do people confess that's actually true, or it's what they tell themselves they think is what actually happened. So I think that's all really interesting.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
What's so strange about Roddy in this is that he is a bizarre client to have. The advocate turns up and he says, right, I've done this pretty much, where do I sign? You know, I'm you know, and the advocate goes, no, can we just check? And I thought one of the beauties of it, you spoke about the point where he just does it one day, as it were, and that to me is the really interesting part of it, because what I was looking at probably from a professional perspective was what happened. Did something happen to a very bright and intelligent boy who felt injustice very sorely against his family and his father? Did something happen on that day, or did nothing happen? Was he sane or wasn't he sane? Have we just read the diary of someone who is completely insane all the way through? And or is it a sane person who's committed an insane act?
Yeah.
Against 3 people, and his narrating of it and reading of it was almost so bland and so matter of fact that's what gave me real cause for concern.
I think if I could jump in, I think maybe it's just because I'm so naive, but we were speaking about the unreliable narrator. We were speaking about, are these 100 pages, am I reading the diaries of a sane man, an insane man who knows he's sane, or a sane man who knows he's insane, and all of that? And it only, I guess because I'm so naive to these things, it wore it so lightly, and it didn't hammer it home at all, that it was only towards the end, when you're reading the investigation and the defense for the Crown, the prosecution, and they're presenting the reasons of actually this might have happened. It wears that so lightly. It's not shoved in your face at all, and I think it's a fantastic testament to the slow burning storytelling of Graeme. And I can't emphasize it enough. It was 250 pages, and I whizzed through it, but you still feel like you had a really meaty crime story that was fantastically told. Yeah. It's such a skill.
Yeah,
I would say, Dan, read
a really nice man in real life.
Second time as well.
That reading makes him look like such a scary, horrible person, and he's a really, really nice guy, which I think is the really interesting thing about writers, that they can seem so nice and lovely, but there's something really like dark
It's
in our
because
psyche.
they get all the horrible stuff on the page.
Yeah,
And if you
well,
didn't do
yeah,
that,
you
then
hope
they'd be
so.
murdering people left, right, and
Can
centre.
I ask a quick question? Sorry, Tariq, I don't want to
No, go for it.
assume your role. I was watching a video, an interview that Graeme Macrae had done, I think with the Scottish Book Trust or something like that, and he was saying that everyone's got an opinion on Roddy, whether you love him or whether you hate him, and I would find it really hard to read this story and not feel at least something. I don't know how people could read this story and hate Roddy. I mean, obviously he's killed 3 people and 2 of them are unnecessary and utterly malicious, but you just feel the oppression of status and of providence, as I'll say again, on everyone. I mean, there's the oppression of the lairds in the big house. His dad has the weight of Christianity on him. His mum and his sister have this oppression of they can see through the void. And I had nothing but sympathy with Roddy. I don't want to go as far to say I would have done that myself, but I understood it.
I would
your
caution
phone
you
number?
against confessing to that, Dan, just as some
On
legal
a live
advice.
stream that's being recorded, yeah,
Yeah.
probably not the wisest choice.
I think
Get Claire's
Oh,
email, I would say.
I think Dan, where it might be, and I totally agree with you. You see and you hear about this really sensitive young boy who's brought up in brutal circumstances.
Yeah.
You know, his father's behaviour, the way they have to live their life kowtowing and scraping from the land. But I think the switch is, as you say, we don't want to give away the details of it, but the 2, as it were, motiveless murders. He gives a motive for them, but they're not really, it doesn't strongly stack up, shall we say. And I think that's probably where people draw the line.
Yeah.
There's a moment in it as well where quite early on, he is employed to go with a hunting party to carry the ponies, and he gets himself into a bit of a scrape there. And at the time of reading it, you think, this is what's going on here? This is really unnecessary. It's come almost as a bolt out of the blue. He's just acted in this way. And it was only upon reflection that the little pieces that are drip fed, the little moments of possible mania, you realize, oh, okay, maybe I've been kind of thinking this way the whole time without realizing it. I thought it was a really clever way to tell the story, as you said, Zoe.
I was also willing to do that at that point as well.
Yeah, well, there is that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I think the whole unreliable narrator aspect it's really tricky to do and to pull off well. And I think one of the reasons for me it works so well in this book is that you jump around, so you get it all from one person's point of view, and then you're moving to other documents and you're seeing it from the perspectives shifting. You're getting other people's point, and suddenly you're thinking you're seeing someone or something in a different light, and you think, and it makes you, as you've said before, question the entire thing you've just read up to that point. And it's a really simple technique, but it's done so well. It's and the whole way through you just start to doubt yourself. And as you said, Dan, those bits of mania, you're kind of thinking, is he doing that on purpose? Is that a purposeful thing he's doing for a future alibi or reason, or is this real? You know, and you're never sure what's real or not. And I think this kind of found footage style of story we're seeing more and more of as well. And, I'm thinking of stuff like The Appeal by Janice Hallett, Devolution by Max Brooks, like these books that are like, here's a bundle of papers, read them and the story will come out of it on its own without you being led through it by one person the whole way. But it's fascinating. Any more final thoughts? Oh, Rhoda in the comments said no joy in this book for me. That's fair enough. It's a pretty bleak book in a lot of places, isn't it?
Yeah, there isn't a lot of joy. I went on about joy, didn't I? But there's not a lot of joy in it, I would say.
I don't really like joy in literature. If I wanted joy, I'd go and juggle puppies. Do you know what I mean? Like I want to like the dark stuff. Like I don't mind if there's like levity and things in books, but I want to like crime books are about murders. So it's maybe an unpopular thing to have said. Sorry.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap things up, I'm afraid. So no joy in crime books. Hopefully some joy in tonight's chat about crime books. And as I said at the start, it's November, it's Christmas time. So it's the last one of the year. And I believe there's going to be a little break over the holidays. So they'll be back at some point next year. But all that's left to do now is to say thank you much to Dan, to Zoe, to Claire, and to everyone at home who's watching and sending in questions and comments throughout. It's been great fun chatting with you guys. 3 fantastic books, 3 fantastic guests. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.